A pipe burst behind the cellar wall and water came roaring out. It hit the floor and rose fast up over her ankles, then her shins. She grabbed a bucket. The bucket was useless. The water kept coming, cold and black, carrying coal dust and rust. She waded toward the shut-off valve in the dark, one hand on the wall, feeling her way. Then her flashlight caught something behind the old coal bin, an iron door, rusted shut, bigger than any door that belonged in a house like hers. She stopped. The water forgot. Her name was Delia Vance, and she cleaned office floors at night to keep the lights on. She had no idea that behind that door sat a sealed train worth $680 million. What could a struggling mother possibly do with a fortune that came with chains? Stay with me on this one. The valve finally turned under her hands and the roaring stopped. Delia stood in 6 inches of cold water, breathing hard, the flashlight trembling in her grip. Up above, she heard small feet cross the kitchen floor. "Mom, is it bad?" That was Danny. 9 years old, and already he talked like a man who paid the bills. She hated that about their life. A boy that age should be worried about baseball cards, not whether the water was going to reach the furnace. "It's fine, baby," she called up. "Stay in the warm, I got it." She didn't got it. Not really. The furnace sat 2 feet away, and if the water had climbed any higher, they'd have been sleeping in coats through a Pittsburgh January with no heat at all. But she said it was fine because that's what you say. That's what mothers say. Now here's the thing you have to understand about Delia. She had inherited this house 8 months back from a grandfather she'd met exactly twice in her life, Walter Vance. A quiet old man who'd worked the railroads his whole life and then, near the end of it, mailed her a key and a deed and died before she could even write him a thank you note. The house was a crumbling brick row house on a forgotten street, the kind of place the city seemed to have given up on. Half the block was boarded shut. But it was a roof, and when you're a single mother cleaning offices at midnight for $4 an hour, a free roof is the whole world. She waded to the stairs and sat on the bottom step, and that old beagle came down to find her. Sarge. 13 years old, gray in the muzzle, one bad hip. He'd been her father's dog before her father passed, and now he was hers, and he was the only living thing besides Danny who looked at her like she mattered. He put his chin on her knee and whined. "I know, buddy," she said. "I know." She should have gone up and dried her feet. Instead, she pointed the flashlight back at that iron door behind the coal bin. It bothered her. It bothered her the way a wrong note in a song bothers you. See, she'd been down in this cellar dozens of times. She'd stacked boxes against that wall, and she had never once noticed a door back there because the coal bin hid it, and the coal bin had been full when she moved in. Tonight the flood had shifted the coal, spilled it sideways, and there it was. Iron, riveted, a brass plate on it green with age. She got up. Her feet were numb, but she went over anyway and she rubbed the brass plate with her thumb. Letters came through the grime. ALLEGHNY Transit Authority, and under that smaller, authorized personnel lower platform 9. Lower platform, in her cellar. Delia was not a woman who scared easy. When your husband walks out on you with a baby and $40 in the bank, you burn through most of your fear early, and what's left is the stubborn kind. So she didn't run upstairs. She pushed on the door. It didn't move. She braced her shoulder and shoved, and something old and rusted cracked, and the door swung inward maybe a foot with a screech that made Sarge bark. Cold air came out, not cellar cold, deeper than that. The kind of cold that had been sitting still for 50 years waiting. "Delia," she told herself out loud, "you go up those stairs right now." She did not go up the stairs. She turned sideways and squeezed through the gap, and Sarge, bad hip and all, squeezed right through behind her because that dog was not letting her out of his sight. Beyond the door was a short brick tunnel, and beyond the tunnel the flashlight beam just fell away into open black space. Delia stepped out onto something flat and wide, and her footsteps echoed like she'd walked into a church. She swept the light around. It was a subway platform, a real one. Tiled walls, an arched ceiling, an old wooden bench bolted to the floor, a sign hanging crooked on rusted chains that read Lower Station Line 4. There was a ticket booth with a cracked window. There were faded posters on the wall for things nobody sold anymore. And running along the edge of the platform, down in the trench where the tracks were, sat a train. She stopped breathing for a second. I'm not exaggerating, she just stood there. It was a passenger train, 3 cars. Green paint, dulled almost to gray, streaked with rust that ran down from every rivet like the whole thing had been crying for half a century. The windows were dark and filmed over. And across the doors of the last car, somebody had welded iron bars, thick ones in an X, and stamped a paper seal over the lock. A seal that had somehow survived down here in the dry cold, cracked but readable. A rail company seal, official. The kind that said, "Do not open by order of somebody who was long dead now." Danny's voice floated down through the tunnel behind her, small and far away. "Mom, where'd you go?" And that right there should have been the moment she turned around. She almost did. She stood on that platform with 50 years of silence pressing on her ears, and every sensible bone in her body told her to go up, hold her son, forget this place existed. Whatever this train was, it wasn't hers to touch. She lived here. She was allowed a cellar and a furnace and a leaky roof. She was not allowed a secret station and a sealed train. But then Sarge started up. The old dog limped down off the platform's edge, dropped onto the tracks with a grunt, and hobbled straight to the last car, the sealed one, the one with the welded bars. He put his front paws up on the door and he started scratching. Scratching and whining and looking back at her, then scratching again. Not barking at a rat. This was different. This was that low, urgent sound a dog makes when there's something behind a door that he needs you to see. "Sarge, come," she said, "come here." He wouldn't come. He'd never once ignored her before in all the years she'd had him, but he ignored her now. He scratched at that iron until his old nails must have hurt, and then he pressed his nose to the gap under the door and let out a long, low howl that rolled down the tunnel and came back twice. Delia climbed down onto the tracks. She had to. She went to him, and she knelt beside him and shined the light through the gap in the welded bars, into the dark inside of the last car. There were seats. Long wooden bench seats down both sides, the way old trains had. And under one of them, chained to the steel leg of the bench with a heavy iron chain, sat a box. A strong box. Black, banded with metal, the size of a small trunk. The chain was padlocked. And on the lid, even through the film of 50 years of dust, she could see letters stamped into the metal. She couldn't read them from there, but she could read the shape of the whole thing. Somebody had gone to enormous trouble to put that box inside that car, and then to weld the car shut, and then to seal it, and then to seal the station, and then, she was starting to think, to seal the whole line off from the world and let the city forget it ever existed. Sarge whined and pawed at the bars. "Okay," Delia whispered. "Okay, buddy, I see it, I see it." She stayed down there a long time, longer than she should have, staring at that box. Then she heard Danny start to cry up in the kitchen, scared because his mother had vanished into a flooded cellar, and she came back to herself. She scooped Sarge up under one arm, all 30 stubborn pounds of him, and she carried him back up onto the platform and through the tunnel, and squeezed them both out through the iron door. Now this is the part where a smarter woman would have called somebody. A lawyer. The police. Anybody. But Delia had learned the hard way what happens to poor women who invite official people into their business. So she did something else instead. She heaved the coal bin back in front of the door best she could. She toweled off her feet. She went upstairs and she held her son until he stopped shaking, and she made him cocoa on the stove. And then she poured herself a cup of coffee at the kitchen table and she sat down and she let herself breathe. The furnace kicked on. The heat came up through the vents. Danny fell asleep against her arm with cocoa on his lip. Sarge curled up under the table with a sigh, worn out, finally quiet. The clock ticked. Outside, snow started to fall, soft and slow, and the house was warm. And for one whole hour, Delia Vance sat there and told herself it was nothing. Just an old train. Just junk the city forgot. Nothing to do with her. Nothing that could touch this small, warm kitchen and this sleeping boy. She had never been more wrong about anything in her life. The knock came at 7 the next morning. It wasn't the neighbor's knock. It wasn't the mailman. It was 3 hard, flat raps, evenly spaced, the kind of knock that belongs to a man who has knocked on a lot of doors and had a lot of them not want to open. Delia looked through the curtain. There was a black sedan at the curb, clean and new, which on that street stood out like a diamond in a gutter. A man stood on her steps in a gray overcoat, holding a leather folder. She opened the door on the chain. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "Delia Vance." "Who's asking?" "My name is Gerald Prout. I represent the Keystone Rail Holdings Corporation." He slid a business card through the gap. "I'm sorry to come by so early. I'll only take a moment of your time. It's about the property. Specifically, it's about what's underneath it." And there it was. Less than 12 hours after she'd found that platform, a man in a $200 coat was standing on her steps saying what's underneath it. She felt the cold go straight down her back. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Prout smiled a small, patient smile that never touched his eyes. "Mrs. Vance, this house sits on top of a decommissioned transit spur that my company holds the mineral and structural rights to. There's an access easement, old paperwork but binding. We've had surveyors in the area." He paused. "Your grandfather, Walter Vance, he worked that line. Did you know that? He was, shall we say, a person of interest to us for a very long time." Now stop and feel what just happened, because the whole story turns right here. A minute ago, this was a woman who found something strange in her cellar. A private thing. A secret between her and an old dog. Now it was something else entirely. Now there was a corporation with lawyers and surveyors and a clean black car, and they weren't asking whether she'd found the train. They already knew it was there. They'd been waiting for somebody to open that door. And the only thing standing between them and whatever was chained inside that car was one tired woman and a chain lock she didn't even own the key to. "We're prepared to be generous," Prout went on. "We'll purchase the property outright, well above market. You and your boy could be somewhere nice by spring, somewhere with heat that works." He'd noticed the coats they were wearing indoors. He'd noticed everything. "All we ask is that you sign over access and refrain from entering the lower structure. For your own safety, it's not stable down there." "How much?" Delia said. Not because she was selling, because she wanted to know how scared they were. $12,000, Prout said. 12,000. For a house sitting on top of something a corporation sent a man in a black car to get before breakfast. Delia was poor, but she wasn't stupid, and you don't offer $12,000 and a warning about safety over a pile of scrap. "I'll think about it," she said, and she shut the door in his face. She stood with her back against it, heart going like a drum. Danny came into the hall in his pajamas. "Who was that, Mom?" "Nobody, baby. Go get dressed for school." The second the bus took him, she went straight to the one person in that city she halfway trusted. A woman named Ruth Acaffer down at the county records office, who'd helped her sort out the deed when she inherited the house and hadn't charged her a dime for the trouble. Delia sat across from Ruth's desk and told her everything. The door, the platform, the sealed car, the strongbox chained under the seat, the man named Prout. Ruth listened without a word, and then she got up and locked her office door, which Delia had never seen her do. Keystone Rail Holdings, Ruth said quietly, bought up the debts of the old Allegheny Transit Authority in the 50s. When the city abandoned Line 4, everything on it just disappeared off the books. There were rumors, Delia. My predecessor used to talk about it, a payroll train, a bond train. She sat down slow. Give me a day. Let me pull the manifest. Before I tell you what Ruth found, I want to say one thing to you directly. If you've made it this far with me, if your heart is going a little faster right now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It's free, it keeps stories like this one coming, and it lets me know you're still here in the dark with Delia. That's all. Now let's find out what was on that train. Ruth called 2 nights later. Her voice was strange, flat, careful. I found the manifest for the last run on Line 4, she said. November of 1931. The Depression, banks were failing. The Transit Authority was moving assets to a secure vault under the city, and one of the shipments never arrived. It was logged as lost, written off. She took a breath Delia could hear over the line. Delia, the shipment was a consignment of municipal transit bonds, bearer bonds. Whoever physically holds them owns them. There's no name attached, and the face value plus 50 years of accrued interest at the coupon rate. Delia, I ran it 3 times. Another breath. It's $680 million. Delia sat down on the kitchen floor with the phone. She didn't say anything for a long time. Sarge came and sat against her. 600, she finally said. That's not a real number. It's a real number, Ruth said. And here's what you need to hear. Bearer bonds belong to whoever holds them, not whoever's name is on a deed, not whoever bought old debts in the 50s, whoever holds them. Right now, that box is chained to a train under your house. If you're the one who opens it and takes it out, there's a real argument that they're yours. That's why Keystone wants you gone before you ever touch it. They can't legally make you open it and hand it over. But if they own the property when the box comes out, it's a different story. So I can't sell, Delia said. You can't sell, and you can't let them in. And Delia, you need to get down there and get that box out before they find another way in. Because I promise you, right now, in some office across town, a man named Prout is looking at a map of your cellar. That night after Danny was asleep, Delia went back down. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her hands were raw, but she took a bolt cutter she'd borrowed from Ruth's husband, and a crowbar, and the biggest flashlight she owned, and she squeezed through the iron door and dropped onto the tracks and went to work on the welded bars of the last car. Sarge sat on the platform above her the whole time, keeping watch, ears up. The welds were old, but iron is iron, and a crowbar and a scared mother are a lot of leverage. She worked one bar loose, then another, sweating in the deep cold until she'd opened a gap wide enough to climb through. She went in. The car smelled of dust and old varnish and something metallic. She crawled to the bench and shined the light on the strongbox. The chain was heavy, but the padlock was iron too, and iron rusts, and her bolt cutters were good German steel. She set the jaws on the shackle. She leaned her whole 130 pounds into it. The lock snapped. She was so busy with the chain that she didn't hear the sound at first. Then Sarge started barking, not his whine this time, but a full, furious, deep-chest bark, the bark of a dog telling you danger is here right now. Delia froze, and through the tunnel from the direction of her own cellar, she heard men's voices, and the scrape of the iron door. They hadn't found another way in. They'd come in through her house. Mrs. Vance, Prout's voice echoing down the tiled platform, calm as ever, which somehow made it worse. We know you're down here. The offer's changed. We're past offers now. 2 flashlight beams cut across the platform above her. 2 men with Prout. Big men, not lawyers. She could see their shapes against the tile, and she was down in the trench in a broken train car with a 200-pound strongbox and no way out except past them. Now here's where you find out what Delia Vance was made of. She did not scream. She did not beg. She reached up, grabbed Sarge, and pulled the old dog down into the car with her out of sight, and she clamped her hand gentle over his muzzle and whispered, "Quiet, buddy, quiet now." And that good dog went silent and trembling against her chest. Then she killed her flashlight. The platform went black except for the two beams sweeping back and forth. "She's on the tracks," one of the men said, "down by the last car." "Then get down there," Prout said. "Get the box. Leave the woman. We were never here." "Leave the woman. We were never here. You hear that? 10 minutes ago this was about a property deed." Now 3 men were standing over an open trench in the dark saying, "Leave the woman." And Delia understood, all the way down to the bottom of her, that these people intended to walk out of that station with $680 million and no witnesses. Her body knew it before her brain did. Because there was one thing they didn't know. Delia cleaned offices. She'd cleaned this city's offices for 6 years, banks, law firms, and yes, once upon a time, the offices of a small newspaper called the Pittsburgh Ledger, where a night editor named Sal used to work late and share his coffee with the cleaning lady and tell her that if she ever had a real story, a real one, to call him first. And before Delia came down into that tunnel tonight, half out of her mind with fear, she had done one smart thing. She had called Sal. She told him where she'd be and when. And she told him to bring a camera and bring the police and don't be late. She just had to stay alive long enough. She heard boots on the gravel. One of the men had climbed down onto the tracks. His beam swung toward the car. Delia looked at the crowbar in her hand, and she looked at the gap in the bars she'd cut, and she made a decision. She was not going to sit in a box and wait to be found. She let Sarge go. The old beagle exploded out of that gap like a dog half his age, snarling, and clamped down on the man's leg. And the man screamed and stumbled backward into the far rail. In the same second, Delia came out the other side of the car, low, and instead of running toward the men, she ran the other way down the tracks into the deep dark of the tunnel, dragging the strongbox by its chain with both hands, her back screaming, her feet slipping on the old ties. "She's got the box, she's running." 2 beams chased her down the tunnel. She couldn't outrun them dragging 200 pounds. She knew that. But she wasn't running to escape. She was running to buy minutes. She dragged that box maybe 40 feet until her arms gave out, and then she did the only thing left. She dropped to her knees, popped the lid of the box she'd already unlocked, and she started grabbing what was inside, thick, banded stacks of old paper, the bonds, brittle and yellow, and she stuffed them into the front of her coat, against her body, as many as she could hold. A hand closed on the back of her collar and yanked her up off the ground. "Where do you think you're going?" the man breathed in her face. He was huge, military big, thick neck, and he had her by the coat with one fist and he drew the other one back. And that's when the tunnel lit up white. Behind the men back at the platform, a flashbulb went off. Then another. Then a voice, Sal's voice, cracked with age and outrage, bellowing down the tunnel, "Pittsburgh Ledger. Smile, boys." And behind Sal, more beams and a bullhorn and the flat official bark of a city police officer. "This is the police. Everybody stay exactly where you are. Hands where I can see them." The man holding Delia went still. She felt his fist hesitate an inch from her face. She looked him dead in the eye, this stranger who'd been sent to leave her in the dark, and she said the truest thing she'd ever said. "There's a photographer taking your picture right now. You want to be the man who hit a mother on the front page, or you want to let go." He let go. It came apart fast for them after that. Prout tried to talk, easy, reasonable, a misunderstanding, a surveying dispute. But Sal's camera had already caught two hired men in a sealed station standing over a woman with a broken lock and an open strongbox. And the police had already heard the word witnesses come out of the tunnel over a bullhorn. And there is no lawyer alive who can unring that bell. The officers took Prout and his two men up the stairs in handcuffs, through Delia's own kitchen, past the table where Danny had fallen asleep with cocoa on his lip 2 nights before. Delia climbed up last, with bonds packed against her chest and an old beagle limping at her heel. And when she stepped up into her warm kitchen, she just stood there under the light and shook. Sal put a hand on her shoulder. "You okay, kid?" "No," she said, and laughed and cried both at once. "No, I'm not okay. I'm rich, aren't I? I think I'm rich. Now, I told you at the start this was a fortune that came with chains. So let me tell you how it really ended, because it did not end with a check the next morning. Real money never moves that fast. The lawsuit came, of course. Keystone Rail Holdings, from behind 3 law firms, argued that the bonds were their property under the debt purchase of 1953. And for 11 months, Delia Vance, who had cleaned this city's offices for $4 an hour, sat across from those firms in a courtroom and did not blink. Ruth found the original Transit Authority charter. And here's the thing that broke Keystone's back. The bonds on that train weren't corporate assets. They were municipal worker pension bonds, money that had been raised to protect the retirements of the men who built and ran that line. Walter Vance's line. The 1931 train hadn't been lost. Walter, a young signalman then, had helped hide it on purpose when the Transit Authority went bankrupt and the vultures came circling to seize the workers' pension for pennies. He'd sealed that car and that station to keep the money from the very kind of company that was now suing his granddaughter for it. He'd kept the secret his whole quiet life. And in the end, with a key and a deed mailed to a granddaughter he barely knew, he'd handed it to the one person he trusted to do right by it. Because Delia did do right by it. That's the part I love. When the court finally ruled bearer bonds, lawfully recovered, belonging to the holder, and Keystone's claim thrown out with a judge's contempt attached, Delia Vance held title to $680 million. And a woman who'd once bylaid a flooded cellar with a bucket could have taken every cent and vanished into another life. Nobody would have blamed her. She didn't. She kept enough to make her family safe forever. A real house with heat that worked, college for Danny, a soft, warm bed for an old beagle for whatever time he had left. And then she took the rest, the vast, almost unimaginable rest of it, and she did the thing her grandfather had frozen a whole train underground for 50 years to make possible. She set up a fund. A pension fund, in the names of the families of the men who'd built Line 4, old rail workers and their widows and their grandchildren, scattered across the city, most of them poor. Most of them long since told there was nothing left for them. She tracked them down one by one. Some of them cried on their front steps. Some of them didn't believe her. One old man, 91, who'd worked the signals beside Walter Vance as a boy, just held her hand and couldn't speak at all. They fixed the house first, though. Danny wanted to keep it, believe it or not, the crumbling row house with the secret door, and Delia understood why. It was the place his great-grandfather's whole life had been pointing at. They sealed the platform back up, respectful, and left the old green train right where it sat, resting in the dark under the city where it had done its long, silent work. And sometimes, on cold nights, Delia would go down to the cellar where it all started, where the water had come roaring out, where a flashlight caught an iron door. She'd stand by the coal bin with a cup of coffee and put her hand flat against that brass plate. And she'd think about a quiet old man who worked the railroads his whole life and never told a soul what he was protecting. And she'd think about the moment she almost turned around and walked back up the stairs. and how her whole family's future had balanced on the stubbornness of a 13-year-old beagle who wouldn't stop scratching at a door. Sarge lived 2 more years, warm and fat and spoiled rotten, and he died in his sleep in a soft bed in a warm house, which is exactly what he'd earned. Delia buried him in the backyard of that row house under a stone, and on the stone she had them carve just 4 words: "The dog who knew," because he did. He knew before any of them. He stood on those old tracks and scratched at 50 years of iron and silence, and he told a tired, frightened woman the one thing that changed everything: don't walk away. Not yet, look closer. She looked closer. And a single mother who cleaned offices at midnight for $4 an hour became the woman who gave a forgotten city back its stolen pension, and gave her son a name to be proud of, and gave one good old dog the ending he deserved. All of it hidden behind a door she'd walked past 100 times and never seen. All of it waiting in the dark for somebody stubborn enough not to turn around.